Good morning and good afternoon to those joining us for today's webinar hosted by Amazon Aid Foundation. I'm Abaunza, Impact Campaign Producer for River of Gold, and I am thrilled and honored to be moderating what I know will be an informative and inspiring discussion with these remarkable changemakers. This is Teacher Appreciation Week, and our team at Amazon Aid Foundation would like to extend our deepest appreciation to all of the educators joining us today. We are incredibly grateful for your dedication and commitment to students everywhere. I'd now like to introduce our panelists and ask them to say a few words. I won't read their bios in their entirety. We would be here for hours if I were to do so. So I will highlight just some of their numerous accomplishments. Dr. Thomas Lovejoy, an ecologist who has worked in the Brazilian Amazon since 1965. Starting in the 1970s, he helped bring attention to the issue of tropical deforestation, and in 1980 published the first estimate of global extinction rates. He also coined the term biological diversity, has worked on the interaction between climate change and biodiversity for more than 30 years. He is the founder of the public television series Nature. He served as senior advisor to the president of the United Nations Foundation, as chief biodiversity advisor to the World Bank, as well as lead specialist for the environment for the Latin American region, as the assistant secretary for environmental and external affairs for the Smithsonian Institute, and as executive vice president of World Wildlife Fund. Welcome, Dr. Lovejoy. You'd like to say a few words?
Well, just delighted to be part of this webinar and to be there with the Teacher of the Year, Rodney, and all of you. So I'm sure we'll have a great conversation.
Thank you, Doctor. Rodney Robinson is a 19-year teaching veteran. He became a teacher to honor his mother, who struggled to receive an education after being denied an education as a child due to segregation and poverty in rural Virginia. In 2015, Rodney started teaching at Virgie Binford Education Center, a school inside of the Richmond Juvenile Detention Center, in an effort to better understand the school-to-prison pipeline. He has been published 3 times by Yale University and has received numerous awards for his accomplishments in and out of the classroom, most notably the REB Award for Teaching Excellence. In 2018, he was the Virginia Teacher of the year, and in 2019, Teacher of the Year. Rodney, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, it's my honor to be here today and represent the Amazon Aid Foundation. It's really unique because throughout the year, I've been given a number of platforms. And people ask, why would you bring a history teacher or social studies teacher onto a science platform? But I tell people that, policy is the reason why we end up in these situations. And that policy can go a long way towards solving some of the issues of the Amazon. And so it's really important for students and teachers to know how to advocate for these policies. So I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us today. Sarah duPont. As president and founder of the Amazon Aid Foundation, Sarah works with scientists to study Amazonian biodiversity with an eye toward educating the public and introducing cutting-edge conservation practices and on-the-ground solutions in the region. She is producer and co-director of the award-winning film River of Gold and the short documentary Mercury Uprising, both films about honest unregulated gold mining in the Amazon. Sarah, would you please say a few words?
Well, on behalf of Amazon Aid, I'm so excited to have everyone there. Thank you to my panelists who have joined. You raised the bar. And what I thought I would do during this time, is such a difficult time with COVID, I wanted to just read some inspirational quotes that I feel reflect and inspire me on a daily basis. So here I go. Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Nelson Mandela. Look deep into nature, and then you will understand everything better. Albert Einstein. Conservation is sometimes perceived as stopping everything cold, as holding whooping cranes in higher esteem than people. It is up to science to spread the understanding that the choice is not between wild places or people. It is between a rich or an impoverished existence for man. Dr. Thomas Lovejoy, the godfather of biodiversity, on this panel. We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better. J.K. Rowling. We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty. Maya Angelou. Even though the students' art situation is bad, it is a reminder that their minds can still wander. And when you get out, your mind can still take you places. Rodney Robinson, 2019, U.S. National Teacher of the Year. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So let's start our conversation. And since we have so many educators that are joining us, I'd like to start with you, Dr. Lovejoy. And could you just begin by telling us what teacher had the biggest influence in your life?
So that's a tough question in a way, because I benefited from some extraordinary teachers. But I think none of that parade of wonderful people would have been significant in my life were it not for the very first one. And so I'm 14 years old, and I'm about to start in a new school. And I learned that you're supposed to take biology in the first or second year. And I said, I'll take it the first year and get it over with. And here I am. So 3 weeks with that teacher literally flipped my switch. And he marched me through the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. And before I was 15, I knew what was then known about the outline of life on Earth, which of course today we call biological diversity. And I've never been able to get enough of it. And his name was Frank Trevor. And he just started me on this road.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure, everyone that's participating today has those kinds of stories. I know I certainly do. So let's shift to how did your interest in the Amazon develop?
So basically there I was, starting at 15, wanting to learn about every different kind of plant and animal there was on the planet. And I wanted to have a lot of scientific adventures. And in a way, it didn't matter where the adventures were going to be. So in 1964, 65, I was thinking about actually doing a PhD in East Africa, because I was just gaga about all the animal cracker animals. And I was going to study montane forest birds in East Africa. And then my former freshman advisor happened to visit the university and say to me, well, I think if you write to so-and-so at the Rockefeller Foundation, you can get the money to come spend some weeks next summer working with me in the Amazon. And that's what happened. And as soon as I sort of was there, in the world's greatest wilderness, 97% intact, with more biodiversity than one could dream of, sort of like a biologist's ultimate Christmas stocking, which had no end to it. That was that. And so I'm still obsessed with the Amazon, 35 years, 45 years later, right? No, 55 years later. Whoa.
And we're all very grateful that you're so obsessed with it. Now, in River of Gold, the Amazon rainforest is referred to as the lungs of the planet. And the Amazon has incredible biodiversity not found anywhere else, as you just mentioned. Can you explain about this biodiversity and why the Amazon is so critically important to the global community?
So the Amazon is important in a bunch of different ways. One of which is that it makes half of its own rainfall. So all those trees and the leaves actually recycle moisture as the air masses move from the Atlantic to the Andes. And so it's recycled 5 or 6 times. You can see plumes of moisture coming out of the forest canopy after a rainstorm. And that's why there is an Amazon rainforest over this huge area close to the size of the 48 contiguous United States. That moisture also benefits every country in South America except Chile. So that's pretty remarkable in itself. And you don't want to pull the plug on a continental climate system. It also is an important repository of carbon, which we worry a lot about because of climate change. And that's because all living things are built of carbon. So we need that carbon to stay in living things and not go into the atmosphere. But the more important part, in many ways, is that all that carbon is in the form of biological diversity. And it is the single greatest repository of biological diversity on the planet. And as I like to say, to value the Amazon for its carbon is like valuing a computer chip for its silicon. It's not just the elements, it's the complexity of what it does. And so the future of the life sciences is affected by what's learned about biological diversity in the Amazon. Chocolate comes from the Amazon. Important medicines like the ACE inhibitors to control blood pressure from the Amazon. And beyond all of that, it's just beautiful and extraordinary.
Agreed. Thank you for that. Rodney, I'd like to turn to you. So we've been seeing in the past few years that this generation of young people really cares about the environment. And we have witnessed global marches around climate change led by young people. Greta Thunberg most recently, but we've got Indigenous youth leaders that for years have been raising alarm about climate change in Latin America and in Africa. So my question to you as an educator, how do you think that we can educate and motivate students to care not just about the Amazon, but about other rainforests in the world?
Well, to me, to force students to care is you have to put things directly in their face. You have to understand the importance of the Amazon to their everyday life. And that's what I try to do with my students. When I want to get them involved into a much bigger picture issue that they will never see or touch, is I try to put the consequences of that issue in their face. For example, I was trying to get my students involved in climate change and, protecting the rainforest. And what I did was I showed how it affected their everyday life. For example, my students mainly live in public housing and urban centers in Richmond, Virginia. And so what I talk about is how the destruction of the rainforest is contributing to climate change and how scientists are telling us that there will be more global heat waves. And so heat waves will directly affect them more than it affects other students in the area. For example, let's say I talk to them about shade, trees, where they live. And so if there are no trees, there is no shade in this mainly pavement, concrete, no vegetation. When that heat wave hits, it's going to be hot. And a study in the city of Richmond showed that whenever heat waves hit the city of Richmond, the urban centers where my students live, the temperatures on average 16 degrees higher than in the west end of Richmond, where there are the parks and the neighborhoods with vegetation. And so I said, what does that mean to you? It's going to be hot. Well, when it's hot, you're living in public housing, then come the underlying health conditions that affect our communities, such as asthma, diabetes, and all those things. So therefore, it will have a harder effect on your community. You will have relatives that will die because of this. And And that's how you get them to understand that, wait a minute, this is going to affect my family, my mom, my grandparents, my aunts, my uncles. And so it's not that the Amazon isn't important to them. Teenagers, I mean, some teenagers have small vision, some have big vision. But if you can understand how the small vision is affected by the big vision, it will really cause those teenagers to become more active. And so once we had this conversation, then they began the process of trying to create gardens, vegetation in their community. And so that's what's really important, understanding that the little actions you take are really important, but at the same time, it leads to the bigger actions. And so that's my main goal with my students, is to get them to understand that the Amazon is important, but because if it's not there, this is how it will directly affect you, your family, your neighborhood. And that's what generates change, things that they can see and touch daily.
Yeah, that's very smart, making that personal connection to their everyday lives, and then that connection you make with little actions. If you had been my teacher, my science teacher, I would have probably had a better grade in science, following your method. So then, continue with that line of thought. You've seen the educational, to the curriculum that was developed for River of Gold. And I know that teachers are so overwhelmed and having to adhere to core standards in teaching. So how can school systems better integrate then and teach these kinds of issues, whether it's about the environment or other social justice and human rights issues in schools, considering you have the core standards? And do you think having films like River of Gold, which have accompanying discussion guides and curriculum, are effective and creative tools in the classroom?
Films like River of Gold are standard. I tell people all the time, you shouldn't be using textbooks anymore in your classroom, because I was reading a study that said the majority of our students spend 8 hours a day looking at a screen, whether that's a phone, computer, television, they're looking at a screen. And so they're visual learners. So why are you using textbooks? Let's start using River of Gold and other films that take the reading in the textbooks and puts it in their face and allows them to see it. And one thing we have to do is allow teachers the freedom and the autonomy to use films like River of Gold and curriculums like River of Gold in their classroom. And that's really, really important, because that is life skills. One thing in Virginia is we have our 5 C's of learning, and one of them is critical thinking. And if you can put everyday problems in front of them and allow them to critically think about how can we solve these problems, what can we do, it really empowers a student and gets them more engaged in the classroom. And then just from a holistic standpoint, this is something all teachers, teachers, students, and parents can do, is we need to get control of curriculums. Curriculums just aren't randomly, plucked out of the air. They're there because students, teachers, parents have advocated and said, this is what our students need to learn going into the future. So it's really important when your state has a meeting about science curriculum, which every state does, that you're there, you show up, and you have your parents, you have yourself, and you talk about these are the 21st century issues that are important to us. Climate change, saving the rainforest, these are the issues that are relevant to our survival as we move forward. And so if you have those people making those suggestions to those committees, then you will get that material into our curriculum. And then we really need to start electing local officials and people who actually care about scientists, not science deniers, but people who are actually scientists, people who actually believe in the power of science in solving our problems. And if we can get all those things in place, then we can basically take control of our learning, take control of our curriculum, so that we can be better prepared to deal with the 21st century problems. A lot of times in our curriculums, we're teaching the 20th century problems. Those problems no longer exist. The problem that existed 15, 20 years ago has been solved. Let's move on to the problems not of the 21st century, but the problems of the 22nd century. And science will help us do that.
Amen. Thank you for that. Excellent, excellent suggestions. Sarah, I want to go over to you. So you worked in the educational space since your 20s. When you decided to make River of Gold, were you thinking about creating educational tools at that point for teachers in classrooms, or is this an idea that developed much later after this all was done?
Well, thank you for that question, Bonnie. And I find great irony and happiness that you are the moderator of this panel today, because one of the things that I looked at really intensely was how film created change and global impact. And so when I first went down to the Amazon and started to learn about it, I wanted everybody in the world to understand what was happening down there. Because if you don't understand what you're about to lose, and how can you engage in solutions? So I looked at films like Blood Diamond and Food Inc. and other films like Hotel Rwanda, which you were part of the social impact campaigns for creating change through these films. So yes, it's always been my intention from the very beginning of creating multimedia platforms in this film to create curriculum, support materials, and to create beautiful assets so people could feel like they were there. Because so many people don't get to have the experience of going directly down into the Amazon. So it was really important for us to create assets and education materials that inspired people and could take you in your imagination to the Amazon. So yes, education has always, to me, been one of the most powerful tools for creating change. And so everything we do is about that, creating change from not only students, but global leaders. And the film has been a tool to do that. So thank you.
And I just want to add to Rodney's point about advocating to be able to use these kinds of materials in the classroom. One of the things that was really successful with Blood Diamond and Hotel Rwanda is that we went to LA Unified and we went to the head of the history department, and he understood the value of the new media advocacy for that. And so he's the one that really pushed to make sure that the materials that were created and that the film would be used. Obviously, the subject matter had to be older kids, so junior and seniors in high school. But it was that one head of the history department that saw the value of it, really pushed for teachers to use it in the classroom, advocated with the school board. And that's to Rodney's point, that's what we have to do. So I just wanted to say that because LA Unified was really
So Bonnie, could you explain to people what the Blood Diamond film was all about, please?
Sure. Blood Diamond, film which starred Leonardo DiCaprio, Jaimin Hunsu, and Jennifer Connelly, focused on conflict diamonds, which were referred to as blood diamonds. And those were diamonds that were mined. The movie took place in Sierra Leone, and how the diamond mining led to arms being bought for rebel forces and then used against the people, and the egregious human rights violations that were being committed in the mines. And there was a whole campaign which endorsed the Kimberley process that would certify diamonds as conflict-free from the point of origin in the mine to the point of sale in the stores. And it was our mission at Amnesty International, I was with Amnesty at the time, that we wanted really the global community to learn about what blood diamonds were, because at that point it was really the human rights community that knew about blood diamonds. And we knew that we had to really educate the world in order for them to advocate for clean diamonds. And that we developed educational guides, and we're very close with Warner Brothers. And in Hotel Rwanda, what we did there was focus on the genocide in Rwanda and tied it to what was the ethnic cleansing, which then turned into a genocide in Darfur. And kids really embraced those films and those guides and really mobilized to take action on the advocacy side for both films. Let me go back to you, Sarah. So you've screened River of Gold globally for the United Nations, for organizations, for stakeholders. What has the response been, and what impact has the film made?
Well, the impact has been diverse and long. It's been going on for a long time, and I have been so happy that this film has been used as a workhorse to educate all sectors of people, from the State Department, who use it to educate themselves for a hearing on the Hill with Marco Rubio about what was happening in gold in the Amazon, to the Vatican, where we screen it in front of the Pope's climate change community, to the Museum of Tolerance, where it was screened in front of a lot of teachers, to high levels of the jewelry sector, where we've actually had a lot of movement with and conversation around what's happening around gold and how can we make better, cleaner supply chains, better technology on the ground that's mercury free. And it's just been an amazing product to actually help people in their space to grow and have more of an impact with what they're trying to do on the ground or in the supply chain or the refineries. It's even been used a lot in the classroom with the curriculum, and we've been so excited to be able to create awareness with kids and hopefully change in how they think about how they buy their how they are as consumers, their products that they buy, how they can at home actually create change, as Rodney was saying, with the way that they live their daily lives. And awareness is key. And this film has been a real workhorse, and it's also been a labor of love by many, many people. You look at credits in a film, they go on forever and ever and ever. And it's been quite an endeavor. I didn't know what I was quite getting into, but it was worth every minute of blood, sweat, and tears. So yes to the power of film, yes to the education, and yes to curriculum, and hooray to teachers. Yes. So, and scientists.
And just very quickly, if you could just tell me about your efforts to have it seen in Peru by the Peruvian government. I know you've been trying to make inroads there.
Yeah, so it's been shown in high levels. In Peru was actually this is a derivative of a film called Amazon Gold, which was shown at COP20, was picked by the U.S. government, and we screened it there. It actually, when we screened it in Lima for the first time, it made the front pages of the newspaper. And a couple of weeks later, the Army went in and started bombing some of the mining camps and taking action. So it's been by the Peruvian people. They can't get enough of it. They're so excited when they see it, and there's so many people that are supportive of it. And with this new film, this new edition, the 2020 edition that we just finished early this year, we were about ready to get it more into the Peruvian vernacular, but then COVID hit. So we'll see what happens with it.
We're getting some questions in, and I just want to tell the audience that in the last 10 minutes of the discussion, we'll be addressing your questions. So thank you for sending them in. Dr. Lovejoy, we are now dealing with the devastating impact of COVID-19. How do deforestation, illegal gold mining, and the destruction of habitats in rainforests contribute to the rise in pandemics?
So COVID-19 is a virus which naturally occurs in some bats in Southeast Asia. And the more we intrude into the rainforest, the more there is illegal animal trade and especially wild animal markets, the higher the probability that something like that virus is going to essentially jump from its natural cycle in some wild animal into human beings. And in fact, every year there are about 2 to 4 new viruses that pop up that way. And happily, none have been as bad as this one, but some of the previous ones could have been, like Ebola in Africa, and the close relative of the current one, SARS, in China. So basically, we did it to ourselves by the way we were treating nature. And so therefore, the solution is to treat nature with much greater respect, especially tone down those wild animal markets and the wild animal trade, and basically lower the probability that one of these viruses will be the next COVID-19. And I actually, as a graduate student, I was studying birds in the lower Amazon. near that place I described. I was also studying the antibodies that those birds had in their blood of the arthropod-borne viruses like St. Louis encephalitis. So I'm acutely aware that wherever you go and intrude in nature, there are naturally cycling pathogens that if we're not careful, we can essentially increase their probability of spilling over into people. So the answer to this is not to further disturb nature or destroy nature. It's actually to embrace nature in a much more respectful way and essentially lower the probability so we don't have to worry about these things going forward.
Thank you. That's a message we absolutely need to get out. There's a second part of this question. It's both to you and to Sarah. Sarah, you're working with a coalition of organizations focusing on the impact of COVID-19 on Indigenous tribes in the Amazon. Can you give us an update on the situation? And Dr. Lovejoy, you can add to that as well, because there's real concern that these tribes are decimated because of COVID-19. So Sarah, why don't you go first, because you've been dealing with a lot of these coalitions working on this.
Thank you, Bonnie. So one of the positive things that's come from this terrible situation has been an alliance of NGO or Amazonia NGOs, national, international, local, Indigenous federations, scientists, artists have come together, working together to start this Amazon Emergency Fund, AmazonEmergencyFund.org. It was just launched today. And we actually started to work together prior to COVID. We started to have conversations. Tom's a member of this group. And then COVID hit. So we were already in place. We were already talking about the Amazons and the tipping point, as Tom came out in December to sort of tell the world. So it was already, this alliance was being built, and then again, COVID hit. So we just started this Amazon Emergency Fund, and it's been an extraordinary amount of work and conversations with Indigenous communities and NGOs to build this fund where there's governance and ensuring that the money gets to the right places on the ground. So it just launched literally an hour ago. And there's a lot of information. Amazon Aid is going to be posting about it. But if you go to AmazonEmergencyFund.org, you can read all about it and about this fantastic community that has come together to help with this serious situation. Since COVID hit, a lot of the restrictions have been laxed. There's a lot of land grabbing going on. In Yanomami territories in northern Brazil, as many as 30,000 miners have come into that territory illegally, bringing, in some cases, violence and in some cases, COVID. So a lot of these Indigenous populations are really vulnerable to this, to COVID, and they don't have the infrastructure in place to help them if it hits our community. So we're trying to raise all together, this group, $3 million to help protect these organizations, Indigenous peoples and forest offenders. We just can't afford to lose these people. They have every right to be there, but they're the environmental defenders and the knowledge keeper of the Amazon. And I know Tom can probably talk a lot more about their importance.
Yeah, Dr. Lovejoy, if you'd like to add to that.
Well, I mean, Sarah's completely correct. I mean, these Indigenous peoples have lived in that forest and explored that forest and learned about that forest literally for millennia. So when they walk through a forest, they know a lot of the things that they are seeing as they walk through, and they know what their natural cycles are, and they've been able to incorporate them in their basically their daily lives and their well-being. So that's one aspect of it. But these are also, these are independent indigenous groups with their own languages. They're culturally rich. They deserve respect in that right. And the amazing thing about the Amazon today is that maybe 25% is set aside in demarcated indigenous reserves. That doesn't take care of everything that needs to be demarcated, but it's a big part of it. And what we all need to do is to work with all those communities and the appropriate agencies to try and shield them from the COVID-19.
Thank you. I have one last question for Rodney, and then we'll go on to some of the questions that are being texted in. Rodney, I think if you were to lead marches, you would have schools emptying out to follow you on those marches. So whether it's climate change or tackling other social justice issues, what advice would you give to young people who are frustrated and desiring change to channel their anger and energy into action and impact?
Well, marching is good, but marching doesn't really solve the problem. Marching just brings awareness to the problem. So when you're finished marching, you actually have to go back and do the actual footwork. I think in today's age of social media and Twitter activism, we think going out and sending a tweet is activism. Yeah. No, that's bringing attention to it. What are you doing after you brought attention to it? For example, you can march all day, but are you going home? Are you collectively organizing your neighborhood so that putting voter registration drives in so that you can elect politicians who will actually care about climate change? And when I say politicians, I never say, you should never start off with national elections. All politics is local. And so it's really important that you get those local politicians, those city councilmen, those county supervisors, those people in at the local level who can make a difference in your community. And then when that person gets, it's just all about growing your neighborhood or your family. For example, it's easy to say, hey, this person is gonna change climate change, but what are you doing? What exactly are you organizing? When are you getting change? Doesn't just happen overnight. It's a long, drawn out process, and you have to be consistent to continuously make that change. You can vote, but then once you vote, are you holding the person that you voted accountable for your vote? Are you pushing the issues to the forefront that you elected this person to vote for? And then you can elect another person. And so it's all about building a coalition. There's never a quick fix to any problem. My mom would always say a quick fix is usually going to create more problems down the road. You have to be continued and dedicated to this for the long haul and understand that activism is not a one-day thing. It's a commitment. And you have to stay committed to your goals of your activism.
Agree 100%. I've been an activist for 41 years. And you're absolutely right. And I'm just starting. So let's go to a few questions that have come in. And this one is for you, Dr. Lovejoy. And for anyone else on the panel who wants to answer, gold mining is the biggest driver of deforestation and biodiversity loss in Guyana. However, the people here need to make a living to survive, and with little opportunity for alternative livelihoods, gold mining is their only real option. These people are often victimized for destroying our planet, and this in turn can deter them from engaging with the nature conservation community. How do we bridge this gap for the good of the people and the rainforest? Excellent question.
Well, it is a great question. And sustainable development really is about trying to explore different options for people to better their existence. And basically, there is no solution to any of these problems until the local people have a reasonable quality of life. That's pretty basic. The interesting thing actually is that, especially in the illegal gold mining, the poor people who are doing it are the actual victims. So, en Madre de Dios, the people who live under those terrible conditions, unsanitary, mercury pollution, social issues, are only earning twice what they would have earned if they had stayed in the highlands of Peru. There's a long economic chain, and most of it illegal, that stems from all of that until somebody somewhere in the world puts a gold bracelet on their wrist. And so that long chain is what we really need to attack, but doing it simultaneously with developing better ways for the local people to lead better lives.
Thank you. Another question that just came in. Sarah, you touched a little bit on this in the Indigenous conversation. What are the roles of Indigenous communities to protect the forest, and can these efforts be formalized? How do we help support their efforts to save their rainforest?
Well, I think for now, I mean, with COVID, that's the direct emergency, and this fund has been really well thought out. We've worked out. I mean, the Indigenous and forest peoples have been up front and center in helping to create what is needed now. As far as the Indigenous people, they are the environmental defenders. They defend their lands, as Tom was saying. They know how to work on their lands and how to live sustainably on their lands. So it's really important to understand, or to look to them. First of all, respect them and look to them for ways that we can all be better in keeping the forest standing. Tom, I think you're more in tune with what's happening with Indigenous people down there. Perhaps maybe you can add a sentence to that.
Well, if we can set aside the threat from the COVID virus, which needs to be dealt with directly and immediately and at scale, the most important thing, number one, is to give those Indigenous peoples the ability to defend their own demarcated lands. And so there have been some really amazing exercises going on where Indigenous groups are taught how to use global positioning systems and map their own lands. So left to their own devices, it would be a pretty benign outcome. The problem is this intrusion by illegal gold miners or illegal loggers or people who just want to take their land to raise cattle or do something else. And that requires national governments that actually are there on the ground and do something about it. Now, I've long said the best defense of a frontier in the Amazon is to have a demarcated Indigenous reserve right there, because anybody who tries to cross that border is likely to get an arrow in some unfortunate place. But when it's happening all over the place, it's much harder for those individual tribes to defend themselves. And it is, in fact, in my view, the obligation of the sovereign governments to manage all of that on behalf of the Indigenous peoples.
Thank you. We are past our time. Maybe very quickly we can do a call to action, because this has been a consistent question. What can all of us do to help save the Amazon rainforest? So maybe if the three of you could just quickly say something, and then I want to obviously thank everybody for joining us. Sarah,
well, let me just lead off by urging everybody to learn more, explore ways to help, and be engaged in this globally important set of issues. Thank you.
Sarah?
Yeah, Amazon Aid has dug pretty deep into this issue. And obviously the first most important thing, organic and reforest. But what people can do at home is we have a whole list of how to be a better consumer. How you live your daily life impacts the Amazon. And so you can go to amazonaid.org. You can look at ways that you can engage in helping to save the Amazon. All hands on deck, everybody. Everyone, needs to be aware. We cannot afford to lose this critical ecosystem. Super important.
We're at the tipping point. You're right. Rodney?
Yeah, just like everyone else has said so far, educate yourself on the issues of the Amazon rainforest, and then make sure you're living your life. Your daily routines are practices that are friendly to the earth. And then more importantly, hold your politicians accountable. Only elect politicians who believe in science, only push those that have scientific-based agendas, and that's just for social issues, for science issues. Everything should be based on science, and everyone you meet, you should hold them accountable to what the science says.
Thank you so much. Well, we are out of time. I'd like to thank our three panelists. You truly are change makers. You inspire all of us. Thank you for participating, and to everyone who joined us for this conversation today and who saw the film the past 2 weeks. Thank you for doing so. Please go to the websites, and to all the teachers out there, we are incredibly grateful for your work. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay safe and healthy.
Bye.
Bye.